And now we have the great privilege to begin the certificate program celebration. What I'd like to do as we begin is to introduce you to our MC, Rolla Lewis, who will be presiding over the whole of this, the whole morning. And we're very fortunate for Rolla. Rolla Lewis is our host. He has been a stellar dean of the certificate program of the Cobb Institute. He has done this for a year. He's poured himself into it, and he's done a beautiful job. You can ask the students. They've been well supported and encouraged by him. He's also a man with the spirit for perpetual learning and supporting others in their learning. So leading the certificate program was a natural for him. Rolla's passions are advocacy in public education, building eco-relational understandings, and research into ways for enhancing school communities, student learning, and wellness. He is Professor Emeritus of Educational Psychology at California State University, East Bay. He lives in Portland, by the way. He's an active author and an active member of the Taos Institute, where he continues his work. He is, under it all, a tree hugger and visionary for human and planetary thriving. Rolla, thank you for the beautiful work you've done this entire year, and thank you for your leadership this morning as we enter graduation.
Well,
it's
thank you,
all
Mary.
Yours.
Thank you, Mary, for your gracious introduction. What can I say? When I became dean, I started closing all my emails with the words "with appreciation and gratitude," and that's really what this program is about: a deep appreciation and gratitude for faculty and students. But I think we have to dial it back a bit and look at our roots. I mean, thanks to John Cobb just for his being, and the Cobb Institute for creating space for the certificate program. That takes some vision. And we've had, I was dean over the second one, so let's reflect on that first cohort, because Terry Goddard, who's teaching the reading class coming up, was the first dean. And Terry, Richard Livingston, Jay McDaniel in that first leadership group defined courses and selected a faculty. And we have to say thanks to that first faculty too. I mean, Andrew Davis, Jay McDaniel, Sherry Kling, Marcus Ford, and a host of visiting presenters participated in that first cohort. It was a community. And I was lucky enough to be a student in that first cohort. And I really value the notion of participatory leadership. So when I was invited to become dean, I said yes. But I have to thank that first cohort for showing us the path. And I have to give my thanks to the 2024 leadership group, Richard Livingston. Hey, that's the second time I've mentioned his name, who's a master of technology. He knows I'm a Luddite. He holds my hand when we go through things. He's a master of doing the websites and information, very responsive. I'm ever so thankful to Richard, who's always behind the scenes, always professional, always compassionate, and my deep thanks to him. And Jay McDaniel, his wisdom, and his leadership in that group was very helpful. So what more can I say to Jay? Those of you who know him, love him, and I know him too, and I could say the same thing. And Leslie King was also in that leadership group, and all three of them were wonderful. They were, I generally have a gentle disposition, but I don't deal with entitlement and white privilege very well. When it comes forward, I get pretty irritable, and they got to see me in that space, and they were quite compassionate with me. So I want to thank that leadership group. I also want to thank the faculty who participated, and what we'll loop back to them when I describe the program. But I want to thank the faculty. Thanks mostly to the students who said, hey, I've got some little bit of romance about this whole notion of process relational thought and practice, and they dove in. So I have to say thanks to the students who really created a vibrant learning community where, to quote the Zapatistas, where many worlds fit. So our program is not so much about checking off 3 courses and being done, but engaging each other in dialogues that deepen our collective understanding of process, thought, and practice. That's to say, participating in a genuine learning community where there's enough structure that provides high expectations, there's relationships that offer care and support, and there's meaningful participation that supports individual autonomy, liberation, and a commitment to community. And autonomy and liberation, or autonomy and community, are always in tension. And that's important. And I think that we foster that. And one of the keys to the Springboard projects that you're here about, that I emphasize with the students, it's about your liberation. It's about you finding out what you've learned rather than looking over your shoulder and wondering if the evaluator is going to approve or disapprove. I wanted each of the students to feel that they were liberated to express what they found in process relational thought and practice. And I always hyphenate process relational. So that's my own quirk. But let's remember, and I think especially now in our political climate, that the Zapatista concept of creating a world where many worlds fits is very much in the process tradition. And we try to create space where we create a world where many worlds can fit. So let's embrace process relational thought and practice is about creating space where many worlds fit, free from dogma and creed, and with this group that we are a genuine learning community. And but what about that community? Richard, if you could give me that requirement slide, I want to make sure that folks who are here understand just what we were about. Okay. So I'm going to briefly go, and I don't mean to traumatize the students, so please bear with me. We had 2 key requirements, that they complete 3 courses. There are 2 core courses, and synthesis and Springboard project. So those are the 2 things. So if we look at the core courses, and here we're back to Whitehead's stages of development or mental growth: romance, precision, and generalization. So the introduction to process, thought, and practice is taught by J. McDaniel. What greater guy than him to hook students into the romance of process, thought, and practice. And I have to say with Jay, he moves in with precision as well. And then we go into Whitehead's process philosophy taught by Andrew Davis, where I think there's a much more greater emphasis on precision in that course, getting to understand Whitehead with greater depth. Then we had process, thought, and world religions taught by Leslie King. What a sweetheart. Maybe that's sexist, so excuse me, Leslie, but you know, I think you're a sweetheart, and I really appreciate you. The depth of your thought, your compassion, and your directness. You're just wonderful. So that was a fun class. And as dean, I got to sit in on those. I had to hover a bit because I didn't want to engage too much. The course 4, process, thought, ecological civilization. That's the course that I really pressed as dean that we would teach. And Mary Elizabeth Moore was so gracious to come in and teach that, and she brought in Jeremy Lent and other presenters. It was just a phenomenal course. So much thanks. And process, thought, and science with Matt Siegel. What can I say? Matt is, to use the same term I use with Leslie, he's a sweetheart. What a thoughtful, caring guy. And I love Matt's position that he loves Whitehead, but he's not a Whiteheadian. And he just has great passion for the subject. So with that faculty and with our students, what a great community. I will go on, but I think I'm over time. So I think it's time to go on to remarks by faculty members and their experiences. So we'll first go to Jay McDaniel.
Yeah. Hey everybody, and it's good to see you. And thank you, Rolla, so much, and thank you, Richard, for being so supportive of this team. We're told that we have less than 5 minutes, and that's great. And I know that you really want to hear from the students, and I understand that. So I will be brief. If you imagine that your task was to introduce process, thought, and practice at this event, at this Cobb and Gathering event, that was my task. And if you consider the diversity of people we have among us now, we have educators, we have psychologists, we have social activists, we have philosophers, we have people really interested in science, we have people really interested in the arts, and our class was as diverse as are you. And my job was to offer, I like Rolla's word, romance. See if I could bring some of this to a kind of provisional aliveness. So I began with the image of a tree. And I said, imagine an oak tree, and it has deep and fairly intricate roots. It has a trunk, and then it has its limbs and leaves that splay out. And you can imagine process, thought, and practice on the analogy of this tree. Let Whitehead's philosophy name many of the roots. It's intricate, it's interesting, you can explore it, it's quite diverse. Let the trunk represent some general ideas in process thought that mean a lot to people and that touch them and make sense to them. And so I identified 20 key ideas that can be understood by lots of people, even if they're not interested actually in the roots. And let the limbs represent the practical applications of all that in our lives. And at several levels, one is at a personal level. What do these ideas have to do with the way I live my life day to day, moment by moment, at home, in the workplace, when I'm alone, when I'm with other people, at that personal level? The other level is at a social and ecological level. What difference do these ideas make to the larger hopes of the world? And our social aspiration in the process movement is for something called ecological civilization, but the units of which are local communities that are creative, compassionate, participatory, humane to animals, and good for the earth, with no one left behind. So my job was to introduce the tree as best I could to that diverse group of students. If I grade myself on that, I would give myself a B. I think I did okay in some respects and not okay in some respects. As any teacher knows, you can't wait for the next chance. So I'm certainly among them. But I really appreciated the students. They were very alive, very conversational. And really the fora, the chats outside class that were online, so much learning occurred amidst them and among them, quite independently of the classes. That was part of the beauty of this whole event and my particular course. All right. Thank you.
Next is Andrew Davis, faculty. So much thanks to Andrew for taking the time to be here to share his thoughts about the cohort. And thanks for participating in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Rolla. And hello, everybody. It's great to see many of you again. It's great to be here to celebrate with you your graduation of our certification program. It's really been a great joy for me to be a part of the program as well. I've learned a lot from each of you. And when I consider, I think, the nature of my course, and not just my course, thinking of Jay's course and the other courses that Rolla mentioned, the sense that I'm left with after all the lecture notes and the emails and the discussion forums and the Zoom discussions is a sense of adventure, right? We might even say it's an adventure of ideas, as Whitehead said. And I think if we elevate above the course and this program you've all gone through, it has been certainly an adventure of ideas. And I hope some of you will remember that adventure for Whitehead is no small matter. It's an essential value of life, really, of civilization. It's an adventure of the entire cosmos itself. In fact, the adventure of the universe as one, which is really another way of him speaking of God in a deep sense. And adventure is a nice way to situate, I think, what we've all been up to, because adventure has to do with ideals. It has to do with not merely their contemplation, but their realization, their practice. And one of the ways which I love Whitehead diagnosing the decay of civilization or society, and we might even apply this to the decay of individuals. We're in a time when individual mental health, meaning, addiction, etc., is off the charts. He speaks of there being a lack of adventure. And so he speaks of bolder adventure being needed, the adventure of ideas, but also the adventure of practice conforming to ideas. And so the adventure of this whole course, I think, has not been meant to merely give you the ideas, merely give you the theory, but also the practice that we hope flows from that theory. So Whitehead in another line says, the best service that ideas can render is to gradually lift ideas into the mental pole so that a certain type of perfection becomes a program for reform. In other words, I like this quote, adventure deals with the lifting of ideals into our minds through contemplation, through imagination, so that they might be expressed in a form of outward practice or manifest in a sense of reform. And again, we can ask reform of what? Well, reform of civilization, of society, reform of yourself in a deep sense. When I first encountered process thinking, for me, it was a very personal encounter with ideas and how my life was unconsciously surrounding certain ideas that I didn't even know I had. And so I would suspect that for the students here, you are different now than you were prior to beginning the certification program. At least I'd hope that's the case. And that's partly because new ideas have entered your mind, new adventurous ideas. And where is it all going? Well, to hark back to the Indian adage, well, perhaps God knows, or perhaps for process thought, God doesn't. Because part of the wonderful thing of adventure, it deals with ideas regarding things as yet unrealized, as Whitehead states, and that's that domain of open possibility. Adventure involves what you have been and what you still might be, right? The past, the confrontation of the past with the future. And so I'll conclude with just two statements I think that are nicely encapsulate, I think, what we've been up to in this adventurous certification program. They have to do with essentially definitions or admissions of what philosophy should be up to. And we hear a lot about philosophy, certainly, critiques of philosophy, I think. Stephen Hawking, philosophy's dead, or others saying philosophy doesn't advance, or, well, it doesn't really do anything. And I think all that's quite silly, in fact. So here's Whitehead. Philosophy is not a mere collection of noble sentiments. A deluge of such sentiments does more harm than good. It is not, or at least should not be, a ferocious debate between irritable professors. And I hope we haven't been irritable in this course. Rather, he says, it's a survey of possibilities and their comparison with actualities. In philosophy, the fact, the theory, the alternatives, the ideal, all are weighed together, and its gifts are foresight and insight, a sense of the worth of life. In short, that sense of importance which nerves all civilized effort. And so I think that's a beautiful way of a beautiful way of expressing what we're trying to do. Philosophy can be practical. Sure, we deal in theory, but we hope that this course and this program has given you means of channeling that theory into practice. And I'm actually quite excited to hear how that's looked in your different projects, which has completed the program. So I congratulate everybody. Congratulations, as I like to say. We hope to stay in touch with you, and hope you'll also spread the news as we continue to evolve this certification program onward. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. Our next faculty who will be sharing her ideas is Leslie King.
Thanks so much, Rolla. And I'm actually not offended by sweetheart. I'm going to add that to my resume after a brief debrief with my husband, who will be shocked that anyone referred to me in that way. If Jay described the tree, the process, opportunity of the world religion classes was to receive those strivings that light on the tree. The various world religions that seek to find a balance and a unique strength from process thought. And so it was really quite surprising to be involved. I want to thank everyone, because I was, a first-time faculty person to this institute, taking over for Sherry Kling, who had done some really beautiful work to line the program up. And we did a little bit of additional invitation and creative work. And really, I was very impressed by the way that the students took what was pertinent and relevant for them, received what was offered by the various process thinkers from world religion perspective, and then sought to put something integrated forward. This is some of the most demanding intellectual and heartfelt work that we do as human beings. To really integrate and allow something to emerge from that creative effort. So it was just an absolute joy. I learned a great deal. There were times, Jay, where I would grade myself quite a bit lower than a B. But the students were gracious, the team was gracious, and we're really celebrating today. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Rolla.
Super. Thank you very much, Leslie. Mary Elizabeth Moore is our other faculty who's here, who is going to be able to share her thoughts. So thank you, Mary. And you'll have to unmute yourself, or Richard will have to unmute you. And now we're good to go.
Teaching in this program was a huge privilege, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Most of the students and all of the students in the class had already taken 1 to 3 courses. So when I came in and met them for the first time, I felt like I was jumping on a moving train. And I was moving down to the club car where they were in lively conversation. And my job was to follow their conversation and jump in and be partners with them in the learning process. And I loved it. Incredible students, and we're going to hear from them shortly. They came together with vastly different backgrounds and interests alongside 2 common interests: process philosophy and ecological civilization. They were searchers, seeking to know more about our planet and the knotty theoretical, practical, and aesthetic problems facing all of us who inhabit it. The students were like flames. Each of them was unique. They were flames in a campfire. Each was unique. They brought their different backgrounds and expertise. And at the same time, they were together making a fire that was brighter and more efficient than it would have been otherwise. So being with them was like sitting not in the middle of the campfire, but around the campfire and enjoying the glow. They had expertise in so many different subjects: philosophy, education, social activism, science, and so forth. So we had these lively conversations all the way through. We drew upon process relational understandings of the cosmos, the history of ecological struggles, and central ideas and practices that have emerged in philosophical, scientific, economic, artistic, religious, and activist communities. What we discovered is that from each of these communities of reflection, there is a lot to learn. And what was fun about this is that these students were already on fire with the romance that Jay mentioned and with the adventure that Andrew mentioned. And they were also on fire with the urgency of ecological civilization. They were eager to find ways to reverse the downward spiral of ecological destruction and to protect, heal, and regenerate our broken planet, which, by the way, is even more challenging at this moment in our history, both national and international, than it's ever been. You're going to hear from the students in just a moment, but I want to lift one important gift that they brought to the course. They brought many, but I'd like you to know that in the online forum, they not only shared their reflections to the readings and ideas of the class, but they also pushed one another and asked deep questions. They shared their own deep questions and emerging ideas, and then they asked questions of one another so that they dove deeper and deeper into the ocean and adventured farther and farther into the possibilities, the real possibilities of ecological civilization. I would say that their work together, both in class discussions and on the forum, was magical. And that's what made the course magical. So today we're going to enjoy the graduation of some amazing magicians.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for your generous and kind words about the students and the program. I want to, before moving into the students, I want to read a couple quotes by Whitehead from Aims of Education. One, he says, students are alive, and the purpose of education is to stimulate and guide their self-development. That's really what our program is about. Another one is that there is only one subject matter for education, and that is life, and he capitalizes life in all its manifestations. So here we are with a group of students who took up the challenge to really engage in the adventure, who took up my challenge to see their Springboard as a project of liberation in their own way and to focus on their own forms of practice. I look forward to hearing each of them. I've read these papers. I'm deeply moved by what they created. We're going to start with Charlie Arnett and take it from there.
Hi, I'm Charlie from Dallas. The title of my project was Denise Levertov as a Process Poet. She's a poet that wrote in the middle of the last century, and she was part of a group of poets that were called the Black Mountain School because of their connection to that university, which was very experimental in the arts. J. McDaniel did a study of that school and wrote essays on two of the leading Black Mountain poets, Charles Eason and Robert Dueck, and showing how they use Whiteheadian thoughts in their poetry. And when he did that, he coined a term called process poet. And he had two criteria: satisfy either one, and you would be a process poet. One was that they wrote about the 12 themes, process themes, or alternatively, they used process concepts in writing the poetry. So my project argues that Denise Levertov fulfilled both conditions. To show she fulfilled the conditions of writing about the 12 process themes, took each theme and took both her prose and a poetry and showed that she supported that theme. And in fact, I showed she supported all 12 themes. And to show that she fulfilled the theme of writing the criterion of using process concepts, I wrote an essay about that. And here's a couple of examples. One thing, take the idea of Whitehead's category of existence, contrast, which can lead to beauty. In her poetics, she makes a big deal about the contrast at the end of the poetic line. The end of a poetic line, the word itself at the end of the line receives a lot of emphasis, not just its meaning, but also its sound. In addition to that, the poet can control the length of the pause at the end of the poetic line. So the combination of the sound and the poise produce the beauty of poetic beauty. So I'm just arguing that she used the concept of contrast there. Another example is how I saw prehension as connected to the literary idea of intertextuality, which is when one literary work uses the work of another. For example, Cormac McCarthy in his Blood Meridian draws from the Bible, from Milton, and from Milton's Paradise Lost, and from Moby Dick. Levertov does this sort of thing of poetry. So, for example, one of her favorite poets was the German poet Rilke, and she wrote a poem titled Variation on a Theme by Rilke. The poem was about the beginning of the day and how the poet responded to it. She took that same theme and added her own take on it, which included more details, more metaphors, and so much. So what I'm trying to argue, there's a parallel of, in a way, of her poem prehending Rilke's poem. And of course, then her poem would be prehended by other poems. Well, so I went on with that kind of thing, trying to show how she did a lot of process things. And what led me to take this particular approach was her essay, pretty famous essay on that she wrote on her poetics, Some Notes on Organic Form. And I saw the connection there between Whitehead's philosophy of organism. Her notes on poetic form said that you should not have a preset form to put a poem in, like a sonnet or villanelle. You let the poem unfold itself and create its own form. And so it was open. Anyhow, that's what I tried to do. And when I discussed it with Rolla, he said it would really strengthen the project if I added a creative component to it. So I wrote a 5-page poem, and the topic of the poem, what I try to do is write about her writing her poem, The Tulips, and she wrote in free verse, and my poem, I used both free and formal verse. I put the poem in an appendix because it was a terrible poem and I didn't want anybody to read it. But anyhow, that's what I tried. That's what I tried to do. And all I can say is thank you, Cobb Institute, for giving me this opportunity to learn. And thanks to my amazing cohort. Namaste.
Thank you, Charlie. And I really loved your work. Let's go on to Dennis Coffey.
First of all, I want to tell Dr. McDaniel that I give him an A or an A+. So yeah, I think he undergraded himself. but it didn't. So I would do the same thing for all the faculty. The faculty were just absolutely excellent. But I have a special thanks for Dr. Davis. And I asked him a question, and he gave me, I think, an honest answer. I asked him, I said, do you have doubts? And he said, every night I have doubts. And, you know, that really impacted me. I mean, we all have doubts. We just got to admit, you know, that we do have doubts. And he also allowed me to do something that really helped in my project. He allowed me to, in his course, evaluate a book by Veronica Kajitkova. And it was, her book looked at Virginia Woolf, and you know how Virginia Woolf was likely a process philosopher. And she's not the only one. She wrote her doctoral dissertation on that, and then wrote the book subsequently. And there have been others who've done the same thing. And then I presented 3 ideas to Dr. Lewis, and I was hoping he had knocked 2 of them down. He said, they're all 3 acceptable. You know, I didn't want a choice. I just only want. So the one that I decided upon was to do basically the same thing, looking at Ralph Waldo Emerson as through a process philosophy lens. And it was really, it was a challenge, because Ralph Waldo Emerson, let me just say this very quickly. There's a book that just came out this year by James Marcus called Glad to the Brink of Fear, a portrait of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he said something in this book that, and by the way, I listened to this book twice while I was getting up my leaves. I'm still not done with leaves. But he said that Ralph Waldo Emerson worshiped the sentence, not the paragraph, the sentence. He was in love with the sentence. And he wanted to write, to use his phrase, he looked at writing sentences as rockets, which I thought was kind of weird. But, you know, and then he created databases and would bring these sentences into paragraphs. And I didn't always find these paragraphs, you know, fluid. You know, I thought they were at times quite disjointed. So what I did in looking through this material, I approached this project from 2 angles. I wanted to do my own primary reading as much as I could, because Emerson wrote quite a bit, and reading Emerson for me was challenging. I wanted to do my own primary reading, and then I wanted to look at what others had written, if they had written anything about Emerson being a process philosopher. And one of the very first essays that caught my eye that Emerson had written was his essay Circles. And one of the phrases specifically in Circles was, you know, pertaining to, he said, there are no fixtures in nature. The universe is fluid and volatile. Permanence is but a word of degrees. Our globe, seen by God, is a transparent law, not a mass of facts. The law dissolves the fact and holds it fluid. And I put this in my essay. It's posted on the discussion board. So I, you know, invite you to read it if you're so inclined. But I found many phrases like that as I, you know, traveled through this material. And to give you a little, I know I just have 5 minutes, but something weird happened yesterday. I ran into my neighbor who was walking in our little neighborhood, and he seemed to be in a daze. And I stopped him and I said, you know, yeah, I think I know why you're in a daze. You're in a daze, aren't you? Yeah, I am. I said, well, just, you know, go to the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he may help you out. And he just looked at me. I said, Emerson said, you know, that, you know, an individual has to rely on his or her own values. And that's the way I've been getting through this period of time, is relying on my values have not changed. My values are much, you know, very much the same. And, you know, eventually this too shall pass. I had a friend, long deceased, who used to tell me, this too shall pass, you know, and it will. You know, we'll get through it somehow. I'm confident. And then the next thing I did was, you know, as I said, I wrote read primary readings and then what others had written. And there've been some other good writings on this. and I address those. And then, I got to thinking about, the project is a springboard. Well, what is a springboard? And so I had to look up the definition. A springboard is something that helps you start an activity or process, along with other definitions. And that's exactly what this project has been. Dr. Lewis was talking about, this is the beginning. This is the beginning of, something new, and it is. And it has been for me. And so I have turned my eyes to another writer who is a fellow Tar Heel, Thomas Wolfe. And Thomas Wolfe has really, he died very young, but he has written some things that, and do I have time to read it? Just a couple of short paragraphs?
Please, you're a little over, so yeah, just
I'm
very
over,
quick.
okay. Well, let me read just one.
Yeah, very quickly, please.
Just one. And the one is this: but it is not only at these outward forms that we must look to find the evidence of a nation's hurt. I think we're hurting. We must look as well at the heart of guilt that beats in each of us. For there the cause lies. We must look and with our own eyes see the central core of defeat and shame and failure, which we have wrought in the lives of even the least of these, our brothers. And why must we look? Because we must probe to the bottom of our collective wound. As men, as Americans, we can no longer cringe away and lie. Are we not all warmed by the same sun, frozen by the same cold, shone on by the same lights of time and terror here in America? Yes, and if we do not look and see it, we shall all be damned together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. And on a personal note, thank you for bringing Emerson back into my foreground.
I really do recommend the Marcus book. He takes the clothes off of Emerson. Let me put it that way.
No, it was a lovely revisitation, and thank you. Our next student is Benjamin Dueck.
So, hello everyone. My name is Benjamin Dueck, and a little bit about me. By day, I work as an academic librarian. So I'm at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Canada, and I'm a liaison librarian for a few different academic subjects, including education and religious studies. So a lot of what I do during the day is help students and faculty do their research. And just in preparation for sharing a little bit about my project, I was trying to think back to why I joined the certificate program in the first place. And it's funny, like many different things in my life, I think it was instinctual. It was like some kind of curiosity pulled me into it, and it wasn't entirely clear until the end of the program what that actually was. But I think like I thought back to when did I first hear the name Alfred North Whitehead? And I had this memory of sitting in the library at the University of Winnipeg, where I did my undergraduate degree, listening to a lecture by the great psychedelic philosopher Terence McKenna. And he used Alfred North Whitehead's phrase, creative advance into novelty, to describe his cosmology there. And really, it's creativity and curiosity that pulled me into this program. I'm at like a point in my life, I'm a little bit younger than some of the other participants. I'm 28, and I'm sort of going through that period in my life where I'm being met with maturing experiences. I'm up for a permanent job interview next week at my work. I'm going through a lot of, I got married during the course of the certificate program. So really, I've been doing a lot of like self-reflection on how I got to where I am as a human being. So it's been an interesting, almost psychotherapeutic process to go through the certificate program. What I ended up doing my project on, so the project is called Meditation, A Pathway to Peace. And in addition to my work as a librarian, I've spent the last 10 years studying with teachers in the Kriya Yoga tradition, which is a lineage of meditation that was brought to the United States of America by Paramahansa Yogananda in the early 20th century. So in the video, I kind of go through my long and sometimes arduous process of ups and downs, my spiritual experiences, my interactions with many teachers in the Kriya Yoga tradition, my struggles, my peak experiences, and I try to synthesize what I've learned into a story of just myself kind of coming to understand who I am as a spiritual person in a pluralistic age, and sort of my own unique spin on yoga philosophy and yoga practice. So I'll post the video in the chat for anyone who's interested. I think it speaks for itself, and it was a lot of fun to do. And I feel like if there's one thing that I've really become more confident in after this certificate program, it's just being spontaneous, being open to novelty, and kind of infusing storytelling and a sense of play into the way that I teach and I interact with others in the world. So I'm grateful for everyone for kind of creating the container for this to happen. It's been such a wonderful experience, and I'm excited to see how the seeds that were planted here come to fruition.
Benjamin, thank you so much. It was an honor to be able to bear witness to your adventure. Our next student after that would be Joe Garcia. You're on, Joe.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much. I would just like to say it's a great honor to be one of the graduates. I just want to thank you, Jay and Mary Elizabeth, Dr. Davis, Rolla, Dr. John Cobb. Thank you for your support and guidance to be able to be here on graduation. I thank you for your support as I went through my own process, as I was learning about process. And it was very insightful. Everything really merged together for me in many different ways, where I grew as a person, and the learning from all three courses was very personally valuable to me as a human being, and what I want to do as far as it relates to my capstone project and sharing what I've learned with others. And so my capstone project is about establishing a garden at the University of New Mexico in the Chicana and Chicano Studies department. And we even have a name for it. It's Jardín Olin, which translate in Nahuatl and Spanish, or sort of a combination of those Nahuatl and Spanish, to the garden of movement and energy. And so it's an intentional learning space that I was inspired to do because of being in the course. If it wasn't for the course, I don't think I would have started that garden at this time. Maybe later, but I've been working for Chicano and Chicano Studies department for many years, and it wasn't until now that we actually planted our first seed in the department space. We have a little casita, which is a really nice New Orleans looking cottage style space with a kitchen and outdoor space. But it was never really used too much, at least from the outdoor perspective, and so I was inspired to say, what would I look like if I translated all my learning from the three courses into a physical space at the university, and it came out to be the garden, and so. This is something that is beneficial for everyone, not only students and faculty and staff in the department, but also across campus, to include other departments and programs, Native American Studies, Communication and Journalism, Africana Studies, Anthropology, Maxwell Museum with School of Engineering with the NSF STEM program, CAMP, which is a College Assistant Migrant Program, which they do Cesar Chavez celebration in March, and also a Farm Workers Awareness Week, so tying it into the struggles of the farm workers. And so really bringing in the culture, the community, the process, all into the space in an intentional way where students can experience what transdisciplinary looks like when working as in one project like that. It just brings all these different diverse areas of study together, and the students can learn from each other, and so it creates a transdisciplinary space, and they could do that in praxis, for undergrads, or if they're in graduate school. I believe it also inspires a lot of questions for master's thesis or doctoral dissertations. That they can get inspired in ways that people in their field, the so-called experts in their field, won't have any idea what they're talking about, because they're not coming from that process lens in whatever their field is, whether it's architecture, communication, journalism, biology. And so that's what the garden serves, is this place of process and praxis. And so the application of process, thought, and practice is the purpose of the garden, and inviting everyone from all different parts of the campus, and also the community as well. We want to make it seamless between campus and community, inserting the El Plan de Santa Barbara. El Plan de Santa Barbara was a document that was started in the University of California, Santa Barbara, to launch out spaces where people felt supported, safe, and opportunities to create for themselves their lives within academia. And so the El Plan de Santa Barbara is a huge part of.
I'm sorry, Joe. We're just you're a little over, so we're just going to have to ask you to wrap it up.
Sorry.
If you could wrap it up, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm sort of just throwing the merging of all these different movements and in an intentional space to create more opportunities so that they flourish and create more opportunities for people to grow within themselves and to share in their communities. So that's pretty much the essence of Jardín Olin, and I just wanted to share that it's all inspired by this course, and I appreciate everyone. Thank you, and I'll be sure to update you as the garden progresses and as we always become. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And the garden that you've shared with me is absolutely lovely, and the idea of creating a community garden at the university that extends out into the community is so impressive. So thank you for everything that you've done. Our next student is Thomas Gates.
So let me also start by expressing my thanks to especially the faculty, fellow students, the Cobb Institute for making this all possible, and especially to John Cobb. I read his book, A Christian Natural Theology, in 1974 as an undergraduate, and it really, it's been a long journey, but I'm so appreciative. So by way of background, I'm a member of the Society of Friends, commonly known as Quakers, and in particular, the branch that can be described as liberal Quakers, who tend to be progressive in their politics and liberal in their theology, but in practice tend to shy away from any kind of rigorous theological discourse. Over the past several years, I've been trying to bring ideas from process theology into our wider conversation, primarily through writing. The roots of liberal Quakers are clearly Christian, but many today would describe themselves as Universalist or post-Christian, and some as non-theists. My working assumption is that this is at least partly a reaction against outmoded images of God, the old man in the sky. Many have deconstructed outmoded images of God, these traditional beliefs, but have not replaced them with any coherent alternative. Many are likely to have had no formal previous exposure to process relational theology, but are likely to find that it strongly resonates with what they already believe. So my Springboard project was to propose a workshop for our national gathering of friends called Reimagining the Divine, God in Process. Workshops meet for 2 hours a day for 5 days. Prior to COVID, our national gatherings involved as many as 1,500 friends meeting on a college campus. But since the pandemic, we have struggled to find the right format. In 2025, the gathering will be virtual, then back to in-person in 2026. So my proposed workshop will be 2 hours a day for 5 days on Zoom in February. So my Springboard project was actually submitting my application to the gathering, to the committee that approves workshops, along with PowerPoint presentations for 2 of the 5 days. And then I was just notified 3 weeks ago that my application was accepted. So the next step now is to develop the rest of the workshop, including 3 more PowerPoints. I envision the workshop to consist of an informal lecture/discussion using PowerPoints for up to an hour, supplemented by small group breakout rooms where participants will be invited to wrestle with the content. My application was framed by 2 quotes, so let me close by sharing these. The first is from Marcus Borg. Our concept of God matters. It can make God seem credible or incredible, plausible or highly improbable, absent or present. And the second one from John Cobb, I think I've said that right. The courage to disbelieve is the courage to stop believing in concepts of God that are no longer worthy of belief in order to make room for more worthy beliefs. So thank you very much. It's been an adventure.
Thank you, Tom, and congratulations on having your proposal accepted. And I look forward to hearing about how it works out. So excited for you. So our next student is Chris Hughes.
Hello, everybody. Andrew Davis, in his introductory remarks, mentioned how personally powerful that first contact with process thinking can be. And Mary Elizabeth mentioned the urgent need for transformational change. And to me, those things go together. And my project is about that. Now, in order to cram too much into 4 minutes, I made a little video presentation, which I'm going to ask Richard to play now, which I think will bring over what it is that I'm attempting to do. So Richard, if you could tee that up, that would be great. My Springboard is a creative localization project. In 1938, Alfred North Whitehead wrote, "As we think, we live." In the intervening 90-odd years, we have lived the planet into its present condition. Clearly, we need to think differently. But who needs to think differently? In democratic countries, people vote. Everyone votes. The majority consistently vote for option A, and only a small group for option B. The way of thinking that puts an X against option B, ecological civilization, is unthinkable to the majority of people who simply wish to improve their lives by earning money and have been enculturated into consumerism. How can we influence the way people think? Here is one example of how this can be achieved. In 1979, John Kabat-Zinn took meditation out of the Zendo and put it into the basement of the stress reduction clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. Zen meditation was reborn as mind-based stress reduction, and over the last 40 years, it has spread across the globe like a grass fire. Mindfulness has become a way of thinking and living for millions of people. The UK Mindfulness in Schools project, MISP, took up the challenge to introduce MBSR into schools across the country. They did it like this. They built an engaging 8-session course and then taught practicing teachers how to deliver it. In this way, a group of 20 teachers attending one training session could potentially reach 600 students or more. It worked. I was part of this project. By 2019, 10 years after starting, over 5,000 teachers had attended the training course, reaching out to over 1.5 million students. Process. What is in it for students? For many of us, encountering process thinking was an experience that could be described as joining dots. Dots of experience that in our fragmented way of thinking and being were islands separated by unnavigable seas. Process thinking, once we arrived there, and process and reality wasn't always a big help on this journey, led to a deep sense of satisfaction and a new way of living with the world. Process is a 7-lesson course designed for professional teachers to bring relational, event-based thinking to their students. The target audience is high school students and young adults. It uses the same delivery model as the Mindfulness in Schools project. The course consists of 7 lessons. Each lesson is made up of a set of PowerPoint slides, teacher resources and pedagogical tips, a video of the presentation, a script, and guided practice exercises. You could think of the lessons in Process as process and reality for first graders, true to the spirit, the insight, but without the categories of existence. I hope a quick glance at the lesson titles will give you a hint of the coverage and some idea of the pedagogical scope in terms of resources, slides, discussion topics, and video. The lessons are In Here and Out There, Experience, Actual Occasions, All the Way Down, Time, Becoming and Being, and Becoming. To conform to accepted practice, each lesson comes with a list of learning outcomes. A flowchart articulates the logical structure of each lesson. Here is the first slide from Lesson 1. The speaker button plays a recorded presentation if a teacher so desires. Here is an example of some of the teacher notes that cover each lesson and act as a springboard to support teachers' own interpretations and teaching preferences. That's about it. I'm really excited to get Process out into classrooms, and I want to thank the Cobb Institute for creating the certificate program and to all the faculty who inspired my efforts, and especially to Rolla and Richard, without whom nothing would have happened.
Well, Chris, you troublemaker. Thank you so much. That was excellent. And whatever I can do to support you in that endeavor, you let me know. I don't know if the audience knows that you, besides the discussion forum, you also started a Zoom group on Sundays that met, and that added to the depth of the community, learning community. So thank you so much for that. Our next student, our next student, James Long, is not here, so we'll miss him, but he did graduate. And our next student presenting is Kevin Pettit.
Okay, here I am. So I'm going to tell a little bit of my story and hopefully see I can show you how process philosophy and theology has become embedded in the way I understand my life. So I was drawn to process theology in a very, very strange way. In October of 1998, I was a physics professor at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, and was being driven to work by my wife at the time. Our car was T-boned by a king cab truck which ran a red light and struck our car right where I was sitting. And accident reconstruction studies later determined that it was traveling at more than 65 miles an hour when it hit our car. So I was right there and it hit right there. And I was put into a coma that lasted for more than 7 days, and I was an inpatient resident at 2 hospitals for a total of 5 months. My outpatient therapy went on for 4 years. Having received a severe traumatic brain injury, or TBI, which has permanently impaired my short-term memory, I struggled for 4 years to continue working as a physics professor. However, though my teaching was judged to be adequate at other institutions, even after 4 years of teaching physics, my teaching skills were determined to be not up to the standards demanded by Carleton College, and I was dismissed from my teaching position there. While teaching at Carleton College after my injuries, a friend of mine named Ian Barber encouraged me to study process theology. He was kind of a big name in process theology when he was alive. He initially was a physics professor at Carleton, but then he started the religion department and moved it and taught religion and all that. He thought that this way of understanding God might help me resolve the question of theodicy, which was troubling me. I couldn't understand how an almighty, all-loving God that has any control over anything on this earth could allow things that allow the accident, which very nearly caused my death, to occur to me. So after reading Process and Reality by Alfred North Whitehead and other books on the subject, that's what got me into it. Before I had started, I was still a physics professor at this point. But then after being dismissed from teaching at Carleton College, I returned to my hometown of Boulder, Colorado, determined to find an occupation in which I could use my experience with a variety of disabilities as an asset for my work rather than not an impediment. So I decided to study at the Iliff School of Theology, where I received a Master's of Arts in Specialized Ministry, and I started a not-for-profit organization called Faith for All, and I accidentally uploaded in the comments the website earlier during Dennis's talk. I'm sorry that I interrupted that, but it's faithforall. The URL is faithforall.org. Faith for All is a disability advocacy organization which works with faith communities of Indian nature and helps them learn how to better invite, embrace, include, and empower people living with disabilities into active lives of faiths in their chosen faith communities. When more obviously disabled, like I had trouble speaking and walking, I was in a wheelchair for a long time. By attending a number of churches, I discovered that most churches offer very little encouragement to people with disabilities to visit, attend, or join. And now, given the substantial fraction of our population which lives with various disabilities, and that's about 20%, depending on how you define disability, and given how religious institutions serve as an important role to individuals and to society, I've decided my efforts at trying to help religious institutions of any nature learn how to better welcome people with disabilities. So my studies at the Cobb Institute have definitely helped strengthen and sharpen my theological knowledge and have affirmed the deep connection I discovered between process theology and recovery from injury, that's the topic of my final project. Now, I want to take this opportunity to thank all the people working for this organization. In addition, I needed to take this opportunity to explain, to note a book that I wrote about TBI and my recovery from TBI. So I'll put it up in the link afterwards, but I just want to thank everyone for what they did. Particularly, one problem I have is my memory for people's names is really bad. Oh, I can't. Richard was super helpful and gave me online all that. So thanks for everyone, though. It was very helpful.
Thank you, Kevin. And I'm so touched by what you're doing with Faith for All and that you got your book out there. Our next student is Eric Ross.
My paper was on Whitehead as a model, and what I did is I kind of wrote a summary of my paper. So I'll go through that now. Making sense of Whitehead's thinking can be frustrating. Only after the course was completed did I buy a selection of his works. During the course, I relied on the assigned text, which gave me a good feel for Whitehead's thought, but may have not been a replacement for the original text, especially when dealing with technical aspects of his thinking. Working with what I had, I struggled, holding interpretations that varied from those instructors, fellow students, and indeed my own interpretations from earlier classes. Thankfully, the forums were useful in expressing differences and reaching understandings. A big issue for me was how useful any of this was dealing with issues facing contemporary society. If I'm going to find Whitehead useful in dealing with these issues, I need to figure out how I can make him useful to me. My cognitive breakthrough came when I stopped thinking of Whitehead's thoughts as a monolithic system and started thinking it as a starting point for various models. In my paper, I outlined 4 models or interpretations of Whitehead that I heard proposed by others or discovered for myself. I used each model to analyze the question, what is an actual occasion? 4 models I called the atomic model, the categoric model, the holonic model, and the analogic model. In the atomic model, an actual occasion is a drop of experience, minute, fleeting, unique. This does seem consistent with the straightforward reading of process and reality. My problem with it is that everything that isn't an actual occasion seems to have a secondary ontological status. If actual occasions are what's really real, what about entities that make up the observable world? Are they less real? Are we humans as living societies merely zombies? In the categoric model, the next model, the actual occasion is a category useful for understanding any process of dynamic becoming. Matt had this beautiful quote, "Actual occasions are not to be imagined as little quantum events that add up to larger things. The actual entity is a free-scale metaphysical category meant to describe any process of actualization, whether quantum, atomic, biotic, or psychic." In the third model, the holonic model, the actual occasion is a holon, something that is simultaneously whole in of itself as well as part of a larger whole. The concept of a holon was popularized by Ken Wilber and forms the basis of his integral theory. I am partial to this understanding as it seems simple and straightforward. Any given entity is both a whole and a part with interior and exterior dimensions. Perhaps a limitation of this view is it tends to assign entities to positions in hierarchies that are static or evolve slowly over time. Process understandings are event-based and much more dynamic. So process holons can be seen to operate at all durations, starting with the immediate and the momentary, passing through the day-to-day, extending over a lifetime, and then spanning the ages. In the last model, the analogic model, actual occasions are in some ways like humans and in some ways not. We can compare ourselves to actual occasions by using analogy, drawing on the similarities and understanding there are differences. Using this model, we can cherry pick Whitehead for the useful parts and leave the rest for later. By the way, this model is similar to the manner in which Thomas Aquinas centuries ago thought we should think about God. He is like us in some ways and in others so much more. Thinking in terms of models has helped me hold Whitehead less tightly and more lightly. Having purchased 5 of his books, I can say that his thought is vast. Like the parable of the blind man surrounded by an elephant, we touch different parts of his work and experience him differently. In our Zoom discussion forum, we're reading Whitehead's early work, The Concept of Nature. There we discovered the actual occasion is initially christened as Tata, the event particle. So even Whitehead's thinking and terminology of what he considered the most fundamental unit of experience, very evolved over time. Well, thank you. And I appreciate all my classmates and instructors and have really enjoyed the course. As you can see, it's got me to think.
It has, Eric, and I thank you so much. I also thank you very much for, after you finished your paper, you sent it on to Matt Siegel to share and to deepen that dialogue. And I think that speaks to you as a student. I think it speaks to Matt as faculty member, that the dialogue continued. So thank you for everything that you brought forward. There are, let's see, David Slater was supposed to be here, but it's my understanding that he's not. Joel Foster's not here, and Jessica Solomon. All three of them did graduate. But our next person who is here is Kathleen Wakefield.
Well, first, I want to thank everyone, all the faculty and the courses, which really fed into this final project. Although it begins with a quotation from Matthew Siegel. He writes, "The modern ontology separating the physical from the psychical can be healed only through an aesthetic act of creative imagination, an act that allows us not only to think, but by thinking organically, also to feel the world in a new way. My project explores how poetry might help us on our way into this way of thinking. It is a plea for the liberating and healing power of Whiteheadian metaphysics and poetry. I've considered myself a nature poet for years, but especially since being part of the process community, I have reconsidered the notion of writing, quote, about nature. The etymology of that word about implies separation between subject and object, observer and observed. How might we heal that division with a poetic language describing being and becoming inside of the cosmos we are in and of, with as deep an awareness of this at the most personal level, yet without taking a solely anthropomorphic stance? How do we use poetry's gifts of syntax, grammar, rhythm, melody, image, voice, and space on the page to reflect the immanence of the world that, as Whitehead says, everything is everywhere at all times? These questions generated not answers, but poems and rereadings of poems. For example, in one poem, Moss speaks, a personhood experiencing a human touching and seeking to name it. The poem Chlorophyll is an ode to the imagined inner workings of a leaf and that molecule. The poem Fen Walk wonders where woman and fen begin and end, gazing man and lady slipper. I fell in love with Whitehead's statement that a work of art is a, quote, fragment of nature. I began to see poetry as a form of what I would call earth speech, words no more separate from earth than mind is from body. The poem, Whose Body Do These Words Belong To, arose from the effort to think and feel with one's body amidst the pulsing web of relationships experienced in nature, and thereby receive their wisdoms. The division between self and nature dissolves. The speaker becomes a prairie fire, half contained. The poet Mary Ruefle describes metaphors as events in which energy is exchanged between two connected things. Does that sound familiar? I explore how the process of writing poetry and its creative advance shares much of Whitehead's theory of prehensions, which I won't elaborate on here. Poetry as a deeply embodied art, evoking the thickness of experience, quote, embodies a protest against the bifurcation of nature. I say that poems are born privately from public prehensions. Process thinking was also making its way into an exploration of an early trauma, my sister's death. Through the excavation of decades-old letters, I experienced my past as fuller, richer, more potentiating than I thought possible. The forgotten words of my mother, spiritually guided, became lures for new ways of thinking and feeling. The abstractions of philosophy and theology fell away as the messiness of life was transformed into an experiencing of how God, in Whitehead's words, uses what in the temporal world is mere wreckage. The resultant poem, Because You Have Carried This Vessel of Grief, expresses the longing for wholeness of self and return to family in a risky, life-giving journey through a wild landscape. My essay concluded with the poem tries to hold everything. And this poem really formed in the first class, in Jay's class at the beginning, and somehow I think generated a lot of what happened for me during the rest of the courses. The persona of this poem unabashedly asks the question every poet asks: how much can this poem hold together? And what possibilities must it let go to become? The very questions each actual occasion must ask and decide upon. What influences and aims will it receive or let go? The poem's shape-shifting persona takes on different forms and voices. It expands, collapses, becomes a map, revives itself to sing again, then contracts to a moment, a face reflected in a window, the world inseparable from it. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you for being adding to our gender diversity in our cohort. This is a call for greater gender diversity and diversity in our future cohorts. But thank you for providing all your insights and wisdom. Our next and final presenter is Ryan White.
Hello, everyone. As the final person presenting, I just want to start by saying thank you to everyone who has shared before. And it's been inspiring to hear, as it was to be a part of the cohort. I've been really inspired to hear the different projects and the ways that people have extended the process thought. I also want to thank John Cobb as well, since he's here on the call, because one of my first exposures to Alfred North Whitehead was reading with him in the Homebrewed Christianity class, Process and Reality. But it took me continuing the journey through these courses, with Jay McDaniel and Andrew Davis, and then continuing with Ecological Civilization to really be able to fully grasp the thought and then how to apply that. So the way that I chose to do that was in a paper trying to take the ideas of process thought and apply that to the topic of reparations, in particular reparations for descendants of transatlantic slavery, but as well with Native American communities. And that comes out of my occupational work with the Presbyterian Church USA and my role here in Europe, in Berlin, working with partners in Northern and Central Europe. And so what I wanted to do with that was to begin by taking these two crises, as Mary Elizabeth states, the one crisis of environmental or ecological crisis, but also a crisis of the aftermath of colonization, and still living through the legacies of that. And wanted to extend the ideas of ecological civilization that are normally applied to an environmental context to include reparations as a just action for sustainable communities. And so my conversation partners for this were a Dutch partner in the Netherlands, the director for our denomination's Office of Repair of Historical Harms, and also then passively a lecture that was shared with me by my Dutch partner, by a woman, I would probably mispronounce her name, but Panache Chigomadze, who offered a lecture in 2023, the Nelson Mandela Lectures in Amsterdam. And I reflected a lot, that provided a lot of good reflection in bringing together some of the process ideas. And I also offered some theological connection to our confessions in the Presbyterian Church, the 1967 confession, as well as the Belhar confession that comes out of South Africa post-apartheid. So just briefly, kind of some of the main points of that is that I began with the look at experience, as Whitehead does, and with the idea that if all experience must be accounted for, then this also needs to include the experience of slave and master, ancestor and descendant, and consciously remembered as well as corporally remembered, so that if our experiences go all the way down to the cellular level and below, and then also all the way up to societies and beyond, then trauma, prejudice, and privilege can also be passed on generation to generation. Chigamanzi argued that in her lecture that Cartesian dualism established rationality and thinking as the highest level, or highest ideal, sorry, and that this was also a bodiless ideal. And so it classified the rational subject as higher than, quote, the non-reasoning and irrational enslaved embodied black. And that this then was extended through later European philosophy that situated outside of history, moral law, and consciousness those who were enslaved and impacted by colonization. And so I think as some helpful counterpoints to this are the emphasis in process thought on interconnectedness and wholeness. And I extended the values of goodness, beauty, truth, and adventure to include justice, and brought the idea of the practical wisdom of indigenous communities as an alternative to the current way of life. That shows a level of, or can expand our imagination for what is possible and how we can live sustainably. In the Reformed tradition, we have a high value or a high emphasis on the sovereignty of God and power. And this, I think, can be problematic, especially when it places God above or apart from the world. And also with an idea of the power to defeat even evil. And so I think that this idea of power develops or had developed hierarchies of civilization and also was used previously to legitimize slavery and colonization. And so instead, we need to focus on love as a key value and key principle, especially a kenotic view, a self-emptying view. And lastly, then, just wrapping up, that ecological civilization being a holistic view helps us move beyond that dualist thought and structure, and that we need to join together both descendants of those who benefit from slavery and those who were impacted by slavery to continue this work for just, sustainable communities. The idea of Ubuntu comes out of African cultures, is becoming widely known, but Chigomanzu argues that it's watered down because it's been contained by time, and that its boundaries are, there are time boundaries placed upon what justice can be asked for. But citing an African proverb, she says, "A crime does not rot." And so the demands for justice are timeless, as I think process thought would support. And we are joined together both with our ancestors and as descendants to continue that work and the call for repair and reparations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Given this point in history, what can I say? And I think that work will go on, and I'm just glad that there are folks like you doing it. It's just come to light that Alan Eason is here and will be able to present. So I'm so happy to have you, and here we go. Alan, it's yours.
Thank you, Rolla. So it's been about 4 months since I sat down to write the creative localization project. It's called Whitehead and Localization at the Yoga Farm. Body brings me closer to what's true.
Oh, I love it.
You'll find that I'm sticking to the physical side pretty strongly, or the pole, if you prefer that terminology. Some of that is just a reflection of my own personal journey, and how I found a different way of becoming through my bodily experiences at the Shala. I think my early life has been characterized by a seduction of the romantic potentialities of the mind, and even took on a career that did that. So I've got several notions of the project I'll just focus on here. The first is I'm primarily focusing on the senses, but this also applies to active imagination. Our culture tends to focus on interpreting those things rather than sharpening the abilities themselves. So even when I was trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction, I was locating interpretations of sensations more often than I was deepening or developing a greater ability to sense itself, even though there's certainly some overlap there. The second is that the capabilities of consciousness are a problem. In other words, the reality, appearance and reality are often quite far apart when it comes to the potentials of consciousness. And this is particularly true if we look at collective consciousness. I would suggest that it's in danger of, the sort of way that humans relate to the earth is sort of an actual world composed of appearances alone, in terms of a lot of talk about our capabilities while engaging in various forms of destruction at the same time. Our nervous systems were clearly designed for small groups in hunter and gatherer societies. And we also know that despite theorizing to the contrary, most historians would agree that in large groups or systems that humans often respond in an unreasonable way to any perceived threat and escalate their hostility in a number of ways that are not great. And I think this has potential implications for revision of the notion of persuasive power, that it certainly works in individuals and in small groups, but in large groups, I think that more questions need to be answered. Another of my findings is that our sensory experience is actually what can bring us closest to the greater number of beings rather than our consciousness or the mental pole. In other words, we share the most in common through our sensing abilities with other beings on the face of the earth. And I'll also, talk a little bit about how, this idea of the brain and the mind is constantly needing to be revised. We constantly try to look at it as a singular concept, and that's simply not happening. The latest research on the gut shows all sorts of things it does for our intelligence, for example. And the last, connected to that is that intellectual understanding is something that I think humans pride themselves a lot on. It's certainly something that I've prided myself a lot on, but I have certainly, the wisdom I have learned in life is that that understanding something and experiencing it or experiencing it in your body is much different. And that if we continue to go the route of intellectual understanding, it's possible that we'll lack the sufficient motivation needed to locate the reality of all our relations. Measley said, the higher our airplane of imaginative generalization and vision flies, the more crucial it is that we check our imagination by landing on the ground of widespread recurrent experience. And I suggest that the less shiny physical side, our sensory capabilities, is that widespread recurrent experience. Just a couple of notes from recent findings. In a new book by Anil Smith says that consciousness is any kind of subjective experience whatsoever, and points again out the tendency to interpret or predict interferes with our ability to perceive things accurately. In Brainwash, the seductive appeal of mindless neuroscience, Daniel Pick cautions against oversimplification of complex ideas and the allure of definitive answers, which is definitely something that you see a lot of researchers in the field are reaching for, definitive answers, even if they aren't coming out and saying that's what they're doing. He also suggests that our assumptions.
I'm gonna
Time.
just have to ask you, to wrap
Okay.
it up
All right.
quickly.
I'm done.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Alan, thank you so much for your exploration. I really enjoyed your work because you were open and vulnerable in your exploration, and it was quite touching. You're the final presenter of our students, and I just have to say congratulations, graduates. Now, we still have a few minutes left, so what I'd like to do is maybe turn it over to the students who might want to respond to each other or comment to each other. Now would be just a little bit of time before we field questions from the larger group, that you would be able to talk to each other. Would you be able to handle that? I'd like John Cobb to be able to hear some of the dialogue between you guys and how supportive you can be of each other. So I'm going to lay that out and let Richard take it from here and see what happens.
So I think among the graduates, if there are any of you who have thoughts to share, questions to ask for one another, please. Kathleen?
One of the things I'm really struck by is, while all of this has been so incredibly intellectually stimulating to people, I thought I had some hesitancies to write about this sort of spiritual, emotional work that I was doing at this time, and thought it was too personal. And hearing people's stories today made me realize that this has affected us in ways beyond I think we expected. I did not expect this. And so thank you. It's huge, just like this tree. It's really big. So thank you. And I loved hearing your stories, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, head, heart, and hand.
It's affected how I understand myself as a person.
Kevin, go ahead. Kevin, say that again very quickly.
I said it affected my understanding of myself as a person, and I view my recovery through a process lens now. It's giant.
I could just say something. Eric mentioned in his presentation how scalable actual occasions are, how they cover everything from the microscopic, the quantum, right up to the behavior of countries in this sort of massive interrelated mesh of dependence and taking in and giving out and rebirthing. And I think listening to all the presentations here, it bears testimony to that. I mean, we all came from such different places. We all had such different interests. And yet we found that Whiteheadian framework accommodated our own interests and gave us a deeper insight into them. And it's I think that's a wonderful testament both to the scope of the process vision, especially as our Whitehead articulates it, and to the way all of us were able to tap into that and bring our own interests and springboard projects to fruition.
You leaned into the adventure.
Exactly, Robert.
Any
I've
other
raised my
students?
hand a couple of times, so I'll just go ahead and
Go, Dennis.
I heard someone mention, maybe it was Dr. Lewis, that Matt Siegel is not a Whiteheadian.
He described himself, somebody described him as a Whiteheadian, and he said, I love Whitehead, but I'm not a Whiteheadian.
I find that to be astonishing to be.
Yeah, well, I was quite surprised. Now, maybe he'll come on at another time and say I am, but yeah, for him to say that, it was very interesting because I think it was very respectful of Whitehead, because he was like, I am who I am and I'm launching out. I grounded in Whitehead. That's how I took it. It was with the utmost respect. So don't get me wrong on that. That he truly loves Whitehead and is well grounded in Whitehead, but he can
And the other thing is, I've been thinking about, at what point in the educational process should process philosophy be introduced? I think at a very early age would have been so helpful to me. It would have put me in a different direction, perhaps. And I certainly in this environment don't see that happening anytime soon, with book bannings and so forth.
It's well, if we're going to move on in that direction, I have to say process is going to occur in the gaps, in families, with my grandchildren, ages 2 and 4. I have them hugging trees and talking about living systems, being part of a living system. It's that sort of thing. And with friends, we're in for some difficult conversations, I have to say, from my perspective. But I think the Cobb Institute offers us shelter. It offers an umbrella for folks and an invitation to folks to come in and have those. I think in things like what Chris is doing with process, inviting others to think about it, those are the ways in our churches and communities, in small ways. I mean, and I don't mean to gobble up time here, but my own vision in becoming dean is that somehow we're creating ambassadors who will go out and speak process relational language in their communities and invite others into these conversations. It's a small group, but we have to do what we can and to help others recognize themselves as immersed in a process relational world. And there are folks, and I'm going to shut up after this, like Arturo Escobar and Michael Osterwelle, who just wrote a book on relationality, very much drawing on Whiteheadian traditions. And he's pointing out how those traditions impact people in Latin America. So it's happening here and there. It's not going to be our national leaders who provide it to us, I'm sorry to say, but have faith in our small groups. And again, support the Cobb Institute, recognize that I think the Cobb Institute and other groups, I mean, Jeremy Lent's Deep Transformations, are really trying to help people make it through and extend those conversations. But here at the Cobb Institute, and thanks to John Cobb and all your faculty, they're giving their hearts to extending this wisdom to the greater population. So I'll can it there.
Well, Rolla, we've got a little less than 10 minutes left and a couple of things to take care of. We probably have time for one or two comments or questions. I do see a nice comment from a couple of people in the chat. Pat Delaney. Pat, do you mind? Would you mind unmuting and maybe you want to share that with the group? Is she still with us?
Yes. Well, I just said the cross-fertilization of interest and exploration has amounted to a burgeoning of projects, practical and intellectual and feeling-oriented. What a harvest that cross-fertilization has wrought. Thank you to everyone who's been part of that process. And I just felt buoyed to see how many different directions people have taken their work together and anticipating what might even be in the forefront in terms of education, the project that had to do with getting process thought out in the same way that meditation got out to the population at large. So I thought it was a very uplifting day.
Thank you, Pat.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more.
It's okay to mention that the Zoom group that originated with the class continues to this day. There's 4 of us that regularly attend, occasionally a 5th, but we're very comfortable in our insulated 4. Being it is a Zoom group that came out of the class, I just want to let people know it's still going on.
Well, maybe I can go ahead and add myself here to the spotlight and just take a moment to let everyone know that the program is going to continue. So what we wanted to do, this is really the first time that we are formally, officially, publicly, this will actually go public, be shared publicly, that there is going to be a 3rd round of the program in 2025. We have been our little planning committee, and oh, by the way, there's a new dean. So Rolla Lewis, this is his final act as the dean of this year's program, but we have a new dean, and I think it's been announced, but I'm not sure but he certainly should be recognized, and that is Chris Hughes. Chris Hughes graciously agreed to step into the role of dean for the 2025 program. I want to say thank you to Chris. I do want to say thank you to Rolla. Rolla put in an enormous amount of time and energy into providing leadership, providing wisdom, providing a lot of guidance about a lot of little things that come up behind the scenes that nobody hears about, nobody will know about but us, who are trying to help keep this ship sailing as smoothly as possible. But I just really, really want to say, express a huge gratitude to Rolla. And I learned a lot from you, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. And I wish you all the best in the journey that you've already described for us here. But I also want to say thank you to the rest of the faculty members and to you students. This has been something that I keep saying this in various conversations. So a lot of you have heard me say this, but it continues to be unexpected to me. Unexpected because what I anticipated might unfold when we first started to conceive this several years ago. And that's how it was. A small group of us were just kind of thinking about, well, what if we did this? And what if we offered that? And how would we do this? And all kinds of little things to work out along the way. But from a small seed, it's now planted and rooted and growing. And today we saw some of the fruit of that program. And there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to continue to plant. Next year will be another tree, if we want to keep this analogy, and that fruit will continue to grow. As long as we're here as an organization and we have the support and we have the interest, we will continue to offer this, because this has blossomed into something absolutely magnificent, and we're looking forward to the 25 program. I just want to say, in addition, just announcing that we have a program, that we have a great person to lead us, Chris Hughes, but I also wanted just to share very briefly with you just a couple of things about the 25 program that are going to be a little different than our previous programs. We've grown and made a few changes each year. We've learned, we've grown. And so this year, one of the things that we're going to change is we're going to add a new course. There was a pretty strong feeling among several participants and people who didn't actually participate in the program that one thing we didn't emphasize quite enough. It received attention, but it didn't receive as much attention as we wanted it to receive in the past. Well, we are going to give it attention in next year's program. As you can see, we're going to keep our core courses. We're going to have an intro course to start with, and then a deeper look at Whitehead's process philosophy. These two will be our two core courses again. Students will be required to then choose one elective that they will take for credit, and then they will also be asked to sit in on one class as an audit. So that's one change. one requirement that we'll be adding to the program next year. But the other thing that we're adding is right here, you see creativity in the arts. That creativity in the arts is going to be a new class. It has yet, there's lots of details yet to be worked out. This page that I'm showing you right here, it's up, it's live. I'm going to post the link in the chat so that you can go here and let us know if you are interested in the program. And we're not quite ready we've got enough details yet to work out that we're not quite ready to open up for registration. And so when you go to this page, if you're interested, you can give us your name and email, and we will let you know just as soon as registration opens. We hope that that will happen within the next few weeks. So that's our plan for 2025. We'll begin. We're anticipating that we will begin in the mid to late January timeframe, and then it will go throughout. Because we've added a course, it'll go throughout almost all of 2025. So, looking forward to that. And again, I'll post that link in the chat so that everybody you can go to there if you're interested. So, back to you, Rolla.
I just want to say that addition of the creativity class or arts class or beauty class, however it's going to be framed, is a welcome addition. So for you graduates, thanks for the adventure. Thanks for building a vibrant learning community for all. Thanks for your relationality. And thanks for having the heart that you were willing to share with me in those emails and questions that you sent. It was a real honor and privilege to work with you, and the faculty, same. Thank you so much for your work. I thank you so much. I just want to encourage those again, how important it is to support the Cobb Institute. I want to point out to the graduates also that you can take those elective courses if you want, and not be in the certificate program, or unless you want to take it again. I just have found this to be a great place to be. I live in Portland, Oregon, which is on the left coast, declared by William Barr an anarchist jurisdiction. So the political climate for me right now nationally is terrifying. But I do know that the Cobb Institute and other places are offering safe space for all. And it makes me very proud to be associated with the Cobb Institute and what they do and represent, and that process relational thought is something that we all have to lean into and share. And I'll do our level best to make a go of it. Anyways, thank you very much. That's it.